Cinematic music is like the modern classical music. It's some of the most popular music that people want to learn. And although cinematic music literally means from the cinema, it's kind of become its own style of music writing, with composers like Ludovico Einaudi or Jan Tiersen writing very cinematic music. But what about those pieces makes them sound cinematic, and how can you make your playing sound cinematic? Well, in this video, I'm going to give you 4 techniques that you can use to make your playing sound cinematic. And I'm also going to give you examples of pieces that use those exact techniques, and I'm going to make something up using that technique to show you how you might be able to use it. So let's get into it. The first technique is a technique called pedal point, or a pedal tone, or a pedal note. Now, I've talked about this technique in various videos, and that's because it's used all the time, and I personally use it all the time for improvising, or if I want to create a particular effect on the piano. But essentially, a pedal note is where you play a repeated note on the piano, and you change the chords over the top of that repeated note. Now, it doesn't actually have to be over the top. It can be around the repeated note, or it can be below the repeated note. But if you play a repeated note and the chords are changing, then that repeated note is a pedal note. And this is used in thousands of different pieces of music, but one of the most famous is probably Interstellar. In the theme for Interstellar, it's mostly based around an A minor chord, which is the notes A, C, and E. But there is a repeated E that happens while the chords change around it, like this. And that E stays there for actually most of the piece of music. You have it for that opening section. You also have it for the section that goes like this. And it also stays there for this section. The reason that a pedal note is so effective is because as the chords change, that pedal note fits in some of the chords, but it rubs and clashes against some of the other chords, which means that it feels like it builds tension. You have this persistent note that's going on underneath everything else that's happening in the music. So if I was going to use this in a piece of music, I would play a repeated note from a scale, and then I would play chords from that scale over the top, perhaps with a melody as well. So something like this. The good thing about a pedal note is that it really helps you to build tension, which is why it's used so much in film music. But then as soon as you change that repeated note, it kind of releases all of that tension. The second technique is something called a tertiary modulation, or tertiary chords. Now, this one is interesting because it's actually used quite a lot in superhero or supervillain music. And although it's used an awful lot in cinematic music, it's something that many people actually don't know about. And a tertiary modulation is where you play a chord on the piano and then you move or modulate up by 3 or down by 3 notes. And this is irrespective of the scale that you're using. So if I play a C major chord, 3 notes up from a C is an E. So I could play an E major chord, or I could play an E flat, because that's also 3 notes up, and play an E flat major chord. Or I could move down 3 to A and play an A major chord, or to A flat and play an A flat major chord. Because my first chord is C major and up 3 notes is E or E flat and down 3 notes is A or A flat, if I move to these chords, then that's a tertiary modulation. And this usually works best if you're going from a major chord to a major chord, or from a minor chord to a minor chord. With minor chords, from C minor to E flat minor, or from C minor to E minor, or from C minor to A minor, or from C minor to A flat minor. Using the major chords is often used to represent superheroes, and using the minor chords is often used to represent supervillains. So using the major chords, maybe C to A flat major, would sound like this. And then using C minor to E flat minor, for example. Because these chords don't usually work together in the same scale, it sounds like you're kind of shifting to a parallel universe or something like that. An example of this being used in a piece of music is the Avengers theme. In the Avengers theme, it starts on E minor and moves to C major, which moves down 3 notes to A major. Now, A major is a tertiary modulation. It's moving from a C major chord to an A major chord. And both of those chords are 3 notes away, and they're not part of the same scale. And in this case, it's a major chord to a major chord. And if I was going to use this in a piece of music, I might do something like this. The third technique you can use is using free time. Now, in more popular music, everything is kind of regimented and very metronomic, which means it's always in time. Whereas a lot of the time in film music, the time is kind of stretched and spaced out to create a specific effect. So instead of something like this, which is very measured and in time, you might get something like this. Spacing things out and kind of playing in free time makes the music sound much more vast. In reality, the music is still measured and you can still count it, but it feels like free time. And often you will see this in pieces of music with a single line melody like I just played, or with chords that are really spread apart. And a great example of this is the piece One Summer's Day by Joe Hisaishi, which is something like this. Often in cinematic pieces of music, the piece will start in relative free time, but then it will get more measured as it goes on. And if I was to make up a piece of music using this technique, then I might do something like this. The fourth technique is creating motifs. Now, a motif is a dominant or recurring idea in an artistic work, according to Google. But in film music specifically, it's often a melodic idea that is associated with a particular character in the film. But obviously, if you are not writing a piece of music for a film, then it can just be a melodic idea that keeps on reappearing throughout the piece. And there is no better example of this than the James Bond theme. Now, in James Bond, there are actually two motifs. You have this motif, which is essentially 3 notes. And then you have this theme. Both of these themes generally appear in the film when James Bond appears, or when he's done something particularly spectacular, like defeat the villain or run off with another woman. And in each of the James Bond theme songs that have appeared in the last 20 years, all of them have used this theme. as part of their song. Interestingly, James Bond also uses the idea of a tertiary modulation because the chords are E minor, C major, and then A major. So that's C major to A major happens in this piece as well. It actually uses the exact same chords as the Avengers, which is kind of interesting. But anyway, before I get too distracted, in No Time to Die, for example, this idea is part of the chord sequence in the chorus. So you get... In Skyfall, it's also in the chord sequence. So that one motif, which is essentially 3 notes, is kind of what makes all of the different James Bond songs sound like James Bond. So if I was going to use this in my own piece of music, I would come up with a very small, simple idea that would keep reappearing in different places in the music. So maybe something as simple as this. And then I can make that reappear in different places throughout the music. Motifs are most effective when you have that one idea, but then you have something else that you can move to in the middle of the music. And then when you return to the motif, it sounds super satisfying because we all are waiting for it and recognize it. A bit like in James Bond at the end of the film when he's finally defeated the villain and you get the James Bond theme. It's super satisfying because we haven't heard it for a while. So here is a piece of music using all 4 of these techniques. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you want 4 fun techniques that will transform your playing, then head on through and I will see you there.